guys, Tamara Hartheiner here again. This time I've got episode 4, Caden the Stuntman, from the epic misadventures of Caden Parker, Old High Knights Year 1, age 10. Chapter 1, School Troubles. Caden, the principal would like to see you in her office. Caden Parker stood up, his heart racing as if he walked to his execution. His eyes found his best friend Logan, who gave him a terrified look. That was exactly how Caden felt. He walked along to the office, a death knell sounding in his head. He hadn't meant for this to happen. Yesterday he'd been a carefree 5th grader goofing off at lunch with his best friend. Somehow he'd crossed the line between appropriate and inappropriate. But he knew the real trouble lay in the letter of apology he hadn't written. He opened the office door and said to the receptionist, "Mrs. Walton wants to see me." She pointed to the open office. "Go." Caden did so. Mrs. Walton sat in the swivel chair behind her computer screen. When he knocked on her open office door, she turned to face him. "Caden, did you bring me your letter?" He squeezed his empty fingers together. Not only had he not finished writing the letter, but he had left it in the classroom. "I didn't get it finished." She lowered her chin, her eyes burrowing into his. "Caden, I asked you to bring me this letter, and I told you we could put the incident behind us if you did. You haven't brought it to me, even though Logan did. This tells me one thing. What do you think that is?" Caden shook his head, too terrified to imagine. "It tells me you did not take this very seriously." "I did," Caden protested. "I just got busy after school and didn't have a chance. I was working on it this morning." "I expected more of you, Caden. This is unacceptable." Caden stared at her, afraid to ask her what she was going to do. Mrs. Walton picked up her phone and dialed a number. "I suppose it's time I talked to Mr. Parker." Caden sat up straight, a tremor of fear shivering down his spine. "I've almost got the letter written. You don't have to call my parent." Mrs. Walton leveled her gaze at him, spearing him. There's always one parent who incites more fear than the other. And then she turned her attention away from him. "Hello, Mr. Parker?" "Hi, this is Miss Walton, principal at Old High Middle School. I'm calling in regards to your son's behavior yesterday." "Oh? You don't know about it?" Mrs. Walton glared at Caden like he was the guilty party. "Well, there was some inappropriate behavior going on yesterday in the cafeteria, and Caden promised me he'd write a letter of apology to one of our aides, but he didn't do it. Yes, there was another boy involved, but he brought his letter in. I'll talk with Caden and get back to you." There had been plenty of pauses in the conversation where Caden imagined Mr. Parker giving his opinion of the course of events, and Caden's stomach doubled into a giant knot of dread. He faced Mrs. Walton as she hung up the phone. "What did my dad say?" "He didn't sound happy," Mrs. Walton said, and for the first time Caden thought he saw a flicker of pity in her eyes. "Friday, your class is going on a field trip to the museum. My recommendation is that you miss the field trip and stay home. Get the letter written and bring it in tomorrow." Caden bobbed his head, feeling contrite. "I'm sorry I forgot my letter," he said, his voice wobbling as he fought tears. "I didn't mean for there to be any trouble." Mrs. Walton stood up. "Sometimes there are consequences to our actions that we cannot foresee." She moved to the open door, and Caden realized that was his cue to leave. As he walked through it, she said, "I'll call your dad and let him know what we decided." Caden could only nod in agreement. He wished he could skip going home and skip the weekend and just jump straight into Monday. The first thing Caden noticed when he got home from the bus was his dad's car in the driveway. His heart drummed a quick beat in his chest, and he swallowed hard. His mom wasn't home, which meant there would be no one to diffuse Mr. Parker's anger. Caden walked into the kitchen and was immediately greeted by his dog, Searchlight, who nearly knocked him over with her excited jumping. "Hey, girl," he murmured, trying not to attract any attention to himself. But of course at that moment Elsa, his little sister, spotted him. Her eyes went wide, and she threw herself at him. "Caden, Caden, Caden, Caden," she chanted. Caden's eyes immediately started to the hallway upstairs, and sure enough, the door to his dad's office creaked open. "Caden," came Mr. Parker's voice. A sigh escaped Caden's lips. This was it, the moment of reckoning. "I'm here." "Come on up. I want to talk to you." His feet felt made of lead. Each step up the stairs took longer than the previous. He wished he could bolt right past his dad and bury himself in his blankets, but he couldn't. Mr. Parker waited at the open office door. Caden stepped inside, and Mr. Parker closed the door. Caden held his breath and waited for the yelling to begin. Well, you probably aren't feeling so good right now, are you? His dad's tone of voice was completely conversational, and not at all furious or angry like Caden had expected. He cocked his head. Yeah, I feel pretty low, he admitted. Then I'll keep this brief. It disappoints me a lot to know you acted inappropriately at lunch. But even worse, I'm disappointed you didn't get your letter written. You didn't even tell me about it, so I couldn't make sure it happened. It's humiliating and embarrassing for me, and it should be for you too. Caden's face burned, and he felt ashamed. You don't get to go to the museum on Friday. But it's not going to be a fun stay-at-home day for you. I'm going to put you to work. And tonight you're writing that letter. You take it in and apologize. I want you to write a letter to your principal also. But she didn't tell me I had to, Caden began. This isn't about her. This is about you. And I want you to write that letter. And a third letter to your teacher, apologizing to her that because of your behavior, you have to miss the field trip. The burning humiliation crept all the way to Caden's ears. What do you say? Mr. Parker asked. Yes, sir, Caden said, keeping his eyes lowered. Is it fair? Do you agree? Caden hardly thought his indiscretion warranted such a strict punishment, but he recognized where he had gone wrong. If he had come home and told his dad everything that happened yesterday, perhaps his dad would be on his side now. As it was, he had learned the story from Mrs. Walton, who didn't seem to think very highly of Caden. He had lost his opportunity to form a defense. It's fair, he said, because there was no other possible answer. That's all we will read from episode 4, Caden the Stuntman, and I'll see you next week.